Alright, welcome to my final video on the Ultima series for now. I may come back to it in a little bit more detail once I've had a chance to play some of the later ones that I never finished. But anyway, today we're going to be talking about Ultima 9, and it is not a totally, woo, crazy, awesome story. There are going to be some weaknesses that we're going to talk about here, but we'll get into it when we get into it. So, Ultima 9, Ascension, came out in 1999, which was 5 years since Pagan, Ultima 8. And it's the longest period between two Ultima games in the whole series, right? Instead of having kind of that isometric 2D world of Ultima 8, or trying to improve on that or make that more fluid, they went to a full 3D engine with, a fully 3D, seamless-ish world. There's no loading screens except when you go from one large continent to another. It worked pretty well. Ultima 9, they may have jumped the gun a little bit, right? It could have been possible for them to have made a really nice 2D game, but they wanted to go fully 3D, and I guess they had the budget for it. And the results are pretty decent, right? The towns are kind of small in terms of the number of buildings that they have. Britain, for instance, is the largest city in the world of Britannia and consists of something like 10 buildings. But those 10 buildings were made with care. So at least you won't, find yourself, looking at a bunch of cookie cutter things stuck next to each other in hopes that it'll give the illusion of depth, right? It's worth noting too that Ultima 9 Ascension came out kind of at the end part of this giant 3D accelerator war that happened in the late 1990s, where there was a conflict between, it was 3DFX had this glide system and their voodoo cards, and they had one set of hardware acceleration, and then there were other, cards that worked using a different instruction set, and there were lots of games that were built to support one over the other. And so Ultima 9 was originally designed to work with these voodoo cards, and but at the same time they had to have some kind of compatibility for the other instruction set that was possible. And so it's kind of a victim where they ended up spending probably a lot more effort and time and money getting things for their 3D engine working properly on multiple different machines, as opposed to what they could have done if they had just made a very nice looking 2D game. It's also worth noting that the game, when shipped, and still to this day, is kind of buggy. There are issues with the physics engine in that there are places in the game where there will be an earthquake, and the earthquake will mess up the physics system so badly that it can crash the game. There are issues with corrupted save files, things like that. The game is not the pinnacle of stability, which is unfortunate because it would be really nice to have a nice smooth, even a little bit simplified but smooth and easy experience. But moving into 3D, and trying to get that all right at the same time that there's this big conflict going on with different types of cards with different interfaces to them. The deck was stacked against them. So we've seen the trend that intros, non-control intros, have been getting shorter and shorter and shorter as the games have gone on. 4 was short, but then 5 was really long, but 6 was a little shorter, but it was longer in time but shorter in text. And then 7 was shorter, and then 8 was really short, right? But this one doesn't even really have a non-control intro to begin with. The game, the first time you boot it up, just basically starts with a zoom in of the avatar's bedroom on Earth, and he's just laying there asleep, and suddenly you hear a voice, and that voice is Hawkwind. And we haven't heard much from Hawkwind. He was big in Ultima 4 because he was the guy in Lord Birch's castle who would tell you how well you were, how close you were to partial avatarhood in each virtue, so that you could kind of say, oh, I need more valor, I need more sacrifice, I need more this, I need more that. We haven't heard much from him since then. I feel like he must have been in 5, but I can't remember exactly what he did in 5, if anything. And as far as I know, he doesn't appear in 6 or 7 or 8, in any, to my knowledge. But he has a nice little start point here, and this is part of the smart introduction to Ultima 9, because without an intro with some like exposition or some kind of like cutscene to draw the player in, we're going to have to do that some other way. And here's how they do it. Basically, you wake up on Earth as the Avatar, and you're told by Hawkwind to, hey, go get prepared. You have to go to Britannia. And so part of drawing the player into the game world is that player going around the Avatar's house and getting all the things that he needs to go to Britannia. He needs his journal. He needs his compass. He needs his backpack, etc. This is the smart part of the writing. This is one of the smarter elements of the writing of Ultima 9. They pull you in, they give you a narrator that is familiar, but you haven't heard from in a long time. They give you some basic tasks, but tasks that mentally prepare you for the adventure, right? And that kind of helps you get into the shoes, literally, of the Avatar. We have, around the Avatar's house, we have a bunch of paintings that are basically just pictures of different covers from Ultima games. We'll see a bunch of those. And then, after you kind of go through a little bit of a brief tutorial on interaction with the game's user interface mostly, and a little bit of minor combat, you go, and what haven't we done since Ultima 6? We go visit the Gypsy. We go get the 7 questions. Again, this is a beautiful way to kind of bring the player in, put them in the shoes of the Avatar, get them to remember all those cool things that remind them of the fun that they had in earlier Ultima games, and get them ready for this new adventure, whether the adventure itself is amazing or simply mediocre. There are some funny bits too, right? Like, as you walk through the park on the way to the Gypsies' campsite, you see a couple of signs. One of them mentions that this is a park in Austin. And so, like, we know that at that time, I'm pretty sure Richard Garriott was living in Austin, Texas. We know that Iolo's Bows was there as well. We also have a great little no camping sign right where the Gypsies' campsite is set up. And then we have like random wolves and even like a pirate, like a guy with a scimitar in the park coming after you. We're going to continue to have nostalgia thrown at us throughout the course of this game, mostly by characters returning and getting to interact with these beloved characters again, but also by visiting the places that you've never seen in 3D. It's a decent way to bring the player in. It's probably some of the smartest stuff that they did for the writing for this game in particular, because the rest of it is not bad, but I'm going to say it's significantly weaker than most of the other Ultima games that we've talked about. That is, we'll say from compared to 7, right? Like it, and even compared to 8, we're dealing with a little bit more generic of a story, I guess. Let's get to that. So, what are the fundamentals of the writing for this particular game? Number 1, Britannia is in danger from the Guardian. Britannia has suffered a bunch of disasters. It has changed the world in a significant way. We remember the city of Jellum from the earlier games. The city of Jellum was destroyed, and Serpent's Hold was destroyed, I believe, too. And it's the people from those settlements went to a place called Valoria, the island of Turfin, where the gargoyles were having their little civilization, was destroyed, and so the gargoyles set up a place called Ambrosia under the ocean for them to live in. We have, the returns of characters that we know and care about. Iolo, Shamino, Dupre, even Blackthorn makes appearances in the game. We have a few new characters. We have Samhain and Raven, who Raven helps the Avatar out through most of the game and has a little bit of a romantic subplot with them as well. However, what we're gonna see is that some of these elements of the writing are a little bit weak, and we can actually point to reasons why these elements of writing are weak. And weak doesn't mean bad. It just means that they're kind of predictable, I guess, or they kind of mess with earlier continuity of the games. So, for instance, we're bringing back Blackthorn, but now he's just kind of like a guardian buddy it's kind of a weak role for Blackthorn to play. He does do a couple of interesting, sneaky, fun things throughout the game, so it's not all bad. But it's like, well, maybe we should have done something more interesting with Blackthorn. We've inverted the virtues again, but whereas Ultima 5, Warriors of Virtue, did so in a fairly interesting way, right? Where the virtue itself was still in action, but the way that it was applied created perverse incentives to pervert the virtue, right? Sacrifice required you to give half your income to charity. Well, that income eventually does get to charity, ostensibly, but this creates a system where people are basically giving more than they feel that they are, able to give without harming themselves in a significant way. We have valor being twisted in such a way in Ultima 5 where it creates a culture of challenges leading to execution kind of things. In this game, in Ultima 9, they basically just flip the virtues, and they do it in kind of the most blunt way possible. The people in Britain, the city of compassion, are all now miserly, uncompassionate jerks. The people of Moonglow, the city of honesty, are now all liars. The people of Valoria, formerly Jellum and Serpent's Hold, are now all craven cowards. It's really, really basic, and considering how clever and interesting the writing has been in the earlier Ultima games, it's kind of a pity that it's this basic. And then we also have, the Guardian raise these giant columns dedicated to the anti-virtues. And these columns are all apparently part of the dungeons that correspond to those anti-virtues. Compassion to despise, etc. And it's funny. It's a little funny. I mean, I guess I can see why you want these columns, maybe, but weren't the dungeons already anti-virtue, and couldn't you just use them? Have something going on in the dungeons? Instead, we raise these columns, and I guess we do damage to the overworld, but I don't know. It just doesn't do that. It just doesn't do as much for me. It seems like there's not a really strong reason for it. Then. And this is going to be kind of spoiling a little bit here, so, if you don't want to be spoiled for a game that came out in 1999, you may want to skip a few minutes, but just to say what happens here in kind of the vaguest terms, what we learn is that the Guardian is now apparently some kind of dark side of the Avatar. He's a manifestation of the evil that was in the Avatar's heart before he became the Avatar in Ultima 4. Now, this I think turns the Guardian into a lazier villain than he should have been, than he has been. Because his plans in Ultima 7 were quite subtle and complex, and weren't designed to just, flip the virtues and make everybody unhappy. They were designed to kind of mess with society and dissolve it from within. And, he's a little bit more of a hammer in this game than he was in Ultima 7. This notion of the Guardian as kind of the evil side of the Avatar conflicts with Ultima 4, because it wasn't by some magical ability that the Avatar cleansed himself of the evil parts of himself. It was an effort. The whole point was that it was an effort, and that he had to kind of, by his own will, through his own desire to do so, to eliminate these negative aspects of his personality, right? It wasn't that his evil side was ripped out of him by some magic spell. It was that he had to, through a thoughtful and careful application of the virtues, learn to succeed and excel in all of them. And to imply that doing that rips an evil part of yourself away from you and turns it into this giant mastermind implies that we never really should have had anybody become an Avatar in the first place. A lot more damage was done in the long run because we had an avatar, as opposed to if we had just kind of like tried to kind of, follow the virtues somewhat and get by and not really have an avatar. It's one of those things where you never want the sequel to obliterate the teachings of the earlier games. You want it to have been, attempting to become a force of good in Ultima 4. You don't want it to be something where any good that you do is automatically counterbalanced by some evil that you inadvertently cause. It's just not a very good... Thematically, it doesn't fit in with the rest of the Ultima series. The other thing that this conflicts with, though, is Ultima 8 itself, because Ultima 8, Pagan, the world of Pagan, was supposedly, had been under long-term subjugation by the Guardian, hundreds of years kind of things. Now, if we look really hard, we can come up with kind of an in-world explanation for this. And what we do is we look back to the beginning of Ultima 7, where you meet with Iolo. He says, it's been only a year or 2 years for you, but it's been 150 years here in Britannia, right? And you can say, okay, well, based on that, we can maybe infer that when the Avatar is not in a world, that the time of that world flows in a non-linear kind of way, right? Because the time between Ultima 5 and Ultima 6 on Earth was the same as the time from 6 to 7, I think, pretty much. Pretty sure. 90 to 92, I think. So but one of those times was just a short period in Britannia, and the other one was 150 years. So, it may be that the Guardian was created at the end of Ultima 4, and then because the Avatar wasn't on Pagan, a long, long time passed on Pagan for the Guardian to subjugate that world. That's the only thing I can think of to kind of make that play in, but it does seem kind of weird if you don't really carefully look through the different elements of the story and how time works in these different stories. So, and the other weak part of the writing is that it's kind of just, Guardian's going to destroy Britannia, ha ha ha. There's not really a lot of subtlety to it. And Blackthorn's just kind of going to help him, kind of thing, for some undisclosed reward, I guess. I'm not sure. So, unfortunately, Ultima 9 has significantly weaker writing than earlier games in the series, especially 6 and 7, because those two, in my opinion, had some of the best writing in the whole series. Ultima 8 had a lot of writing, and it had some interesting stuff going on in it, but at the same time, it was a little bit more it was a little bit closer to a generic hack and slash. A little bit. There aren't a lot of really cool, gripping characters in Ultima 8, and a lot of your heritage, characters have been ripped away, Iolo, Shamino, etc. So, despite the fact that Ultima 9 has weaker writing than the earlier entries, part of that, I think, comes from the fact that there was a lot of different versions of this plot that were produced. There's the actual plot that the game was released with, but then there's actually two draft plots that were leaked eventually, and they both show kind of some different things happening. Some of it was technical, we wanted to have a civil war brewing in Britannia between different people obeying different anti-virtues kind of thing, and we just didn't have the engine to do that. There wasn't enough computing power to implement it in our engine. Fair enough. But one of the elements that can hurt a plot or hurt the process of writing is having this kind of confusion and rushness in trying to get something out there and get something solidified. You end up simplifying things, because when you've got a bunch of different clashing ideas in stories, you usually just go with something with the simplest versions of what you can do, and then you end up with issues with inconsistency where everybody's working trying to brainstorm new ideas for the story, and they don't have enough time to think about, well, how does this fit in with the earlier lore? How much are we going to change? Can we justify the things that we're going to change? Because you can change previous lore, It just has to be justified, and ideally it doesn't make the efforts that were put in earlier on a waste, right? That's one of the problems with this one. It makes your efforts in Ultima 4 to become the Avatar kind of a waste, because inevitably they led to the subjugation of Pagan and significant destruction of Britannia and all that kind of stuff. So, despite the weakness of the writing, despite the bugginess of the engine, despite the rather simple environments, what makes this game worthwhile? Well, one of the things I'll say about this game that it doesn't lack in is kind of, despite the kind of writing that has some issues here and there, it does come to kind of a reasonably like heartfelt conclusion. Like it is the conclusion to a series that you in theory have been following for 10 years now, right? Ultima 1 was 1987, something like that, 1986. And so for a group of characters that had a bunch of really good adventures together, this game does provide a reasonably appropriate conclusion. And it is a conclusion, right? Like you're ending the story of the Avatar here, and the other characters that spent time with the Avatar have their own issues in this game that you're going to help them get through, kind of thing. I would say that that's fairly good for the in the sense of it makes you want to at least see what happened. Whether that involves you watching a Let's Play or actually playing through the game yourself, fair enough. But like, it is, I think, a little bit of an incentive to do so. The game had some pretty decent and interesting gameplay for its time. Its controls are a little clunky by today's standards, but they're at least innovative. Nowadays, you would always have like WASD to kind of walk around. In this, the game uses the right click to move, and which direction you're moving is dependent on which buttons you're holding onto. And so holding onto no buttons walks you forward. Holding onto control walks you to the left. Alt to the right. And if you hold both, you walk backwards. It's clunky, but it's at least it's at least kind of innovative, and it was a neat idea at least to try it out. The way that jumping works in the game is intelligent. You point at an area and you say, "I want to jump," and if you can jump there, you'll jump there. That makes it so that the game can have jumping puzzles that don't require a lot of like dexterity on your own part, or timing. Timing can still be an issue, but like it doesn't require you to like hold shift and then hold W and then hit space at the right time, kind of thing. You just point to the thing and you jump there if you can jump there. It has a lot of fun spells to play with, a lot of fun environments to walk around in. The combat is kind of basic, but at least it's satisfying. You need to wail on some bad guys, kind of thing. It has a lot of neat areas to explore. The dungeons are fun puzzle areas with a lot of neat ideas and a lot of interesting gameplay there. The end of the game, the final climactic battle with the Guardian, is not you hitting the Guardian with a sword and him hitting you with another sword. It's more thoughtful than that. And, we have to thank our lucky stars that in the end, the Ultima series decided to not, fall into the trap of, demigod wailing on other demigod with a magic sword, kind of thing. It's really good to see all these characters. If you had played Ultima 7 in 92, 93, and you had played 8 and you were like, oh man, I really want to see these my friends again in Ultima 8, but you don't get a chance to. Ultima 9 gives you a chance to kind of see all of them and hear all of them speak. The whole game is voiced, so you get to hear the Avatar talk with his friends. You get to hear his friends talk back to him. That's kind of a nice thing to close out your experience with the Ultima series. There's a lot of dialogue, and the dialogue has a lot of cool options. And while the options don't necessarily have huge effects all the time, there at least are different reactions based on the Avatar's, responses that you choose. And so, you can, you can tell a person, are you going to come back after this? And you can be like, well, I don't know, probably not. Or you can be like, yes, I'm sure I'll come back. Or you can be like, no, I'm sure I won't come back. And each of those different responses has a different response for the person you're talking to. That kind of depth in the dialogue system is something that I really appreciate, especially in a game that's actually fully voiced, because it means that they had to have all those actors say all of those lines for all of those different possibilities, which, I admire that effort. But here's the thing. Here's the one thing that I want to say to encourage you to check out Ultima 9, and it is the soundtrack. The soundtrack was written and was made by a guy named George Oldziey, who's done a few other games. I think he worked on, I'm not gonna, I forget what he worked on other than this, but the soundtrack for Ultima 9 is amazing. 40-part orchestra, CD audio, amazing, good stuff. Some of your favorite, if you like Ultima, some of your favorite songs are there, rendered in amazing detail. For the towns, each town, is starts out under the influence of the anti-virtue, and then later switches over after you fix the virtue problem to the good virtue. And so for a lot of these towns, there's a version of the song for anti-virtue and a version of the song for pro-virtue. It's a fantastic soundtrack, and it alone is a reason to at least go in, check this game out, play around a little bit, maybe find the soundtrack on YouTube or something like that. And that's actually the part of the game that really took the most of my time, honestly, because I picked this up. I actually got the Dragon Edition. I still have it in one of my it's buried somewhere, but I got the Dragon Edition, and it came with a CD with most of the soundtrack on it. And I've probably spent more time listening to that soundtrack, which is, a 30-40 minute soundtrack, than I have spent actually playing the game, because I got the game and then I went off to college, and I didn't have enough time to actually, and I got a new computer and everything was all topsy-turvy for me. So I didn't really get a chance to play it as much as I wanted to, especially with the bugs that were in it back in the day. But yeah, if you want to see a conclusion of the Ultima series, it's worth looking at. If you want to see those old characters come back, it's worth looking at. If you want to see a really intricate and amazing subtle story, you're probably not going to find that. If you want to find some cool character interactions, if you want to find some really good music, you will enjoy this game. Assuming you can get through the bugs. I'll have been showing clips of it throughout this talk, but just earlier today I went and I played through the intro, and there's like a movie that shows up after you leave Earth, and it just didn't render on my computer, so I don't know I don't remember what it looks like, kind of thing. So be it. But yeah, Ultima 9, conclusion of a fantastic series, dogged by a few problematic issues with its production, but in the end, it's a nice conclusion to a good story that, if you want to, you can check it out, and these days, it's not expensive anymore. So, yeah. That's all I've got for today. I hope you enjoy. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, you know what to do. Otherwise, I will see you next time. I think one of the videos I'm going to do this week is I'm going to talk about techniques for, well, not techniques, but a special technique for deepening writing. And then I'll probably try to finish reading a book and then do a review of that. So that's kind of the plans. Maybe we'll end up with more than that, don't know, but here we go. And this will conclude my coverage of the Ultima series for the time being. Maybe I'll have something more to say after I've finished some of these games, because I think I'm actually going to go back and play through them, the ones that I never finished. Because I finished 4 and I finished 5, but I want to finish 6. I found out that my old save game is still intact, and I found my notebook that had the notes of what I had done so far. So I think I might be able to finish 6 without too much difficulty. And then I've got 7 through Exalt. I'm going to play through that. And then I'd really like to play through 8, but I might need a walkthrough for that one because that one's tough. We'll see. Anyway, that's kind of far future talk because I don't have a whole hell of a lot of time to game these days. But yeah, Ultima 9. Not as stellar as Ultima 7 or Ultima 6, but tried to do some new things, succeeded in some places, semi-succeeded in other places. Amazing soundtrack. And yeah, have a good day, and I'll see y'all later.